All right, my friends, welcome back. Teresa Yanaros, a degreed journalist and devout Catholic, is dedicated to addressing the growing trend of disaffiliation with religion, where many turn to spiritual but not religious ideologies, leading to New Age and occult practices. Earlier in her career, she was a successful author and speaker, exploring modern American spiritualism and attempting to reconcile it with Christianity before experiencing a radical deliverance from occult deception. Now she coaches ex-New Agers returning to Christ and provides Catholics with the tools to resist cultural traps. Through her growing ministry of online resources, classes, YouTube, and blog, Spirit Sanctified, Teresa helps Christians stand firm against deception. In her new book coming out in January, Freedom from Darkness, she offers a practical roadmap that explains how people become ensnared in the occult and provides a path to freedom through repentance, conversion, and the sacraments. And we want to welcome to the program Teresa Yanaros. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, thank you, Jim and Cheryl, for having me.
Teresa, this is fascinating, and we know it's a very much a slippery slope. Some of these tweens, if you will, preteens, start reading different books, twitches, and some of these things that kind of dabble in the occult, and you think it's innocent, it's a little storybook, but it sometimes doesn't stop there, and they get, what is it, curious, captivated? What starts one down the wrong path?
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, because I always say it starts with curiosity. So you hit the nail on the head there. And you're totally right. It's reaching the younger generations. It's also reaching adults, too. I would say it's just really pervasive across the board. One thing you do see these days on TikTok, there's this hashtag witch talk, which has billions of views on it. And so you have these people that are believing these things, teaching the younger generations how to do it. And because of the internet, it's so easy to fall into these traps, because it's really easy access on learning how to engage in these practices. And it's becoming normalized in our society. So you can even just go into any of the stores and you can usually find tarot cards and Ouija boards, and across the board, you're constantly pummeled with these ideologies. And it starts with curiosity. A person will say, well, I wonder if this might work. And so when a person chooses to engage in something, they're looking for something that's going to prove up what they want to believe about it, or prove up that lie. And what happens here is a system that I call occult anchoring, where if they perceive something as working, whether it's not even true or if it's some sort of demonic response, and they now believe it, they're more inclined to go deeper into those practices and beliefs, and it's a bottomless pit.
Wow.
Now, I remember when I was growing up, and we're talking now 60 years ago, 1964, around that time, Mattel it's Christmas time, and that one of the big sellers was the Ouija board, and that was out there. And I think nobody really thought anything of it. It was just a toy because it was made by Mattel. But for you personally, Teresa, can you recall a specific moment or event that caused you to start to question the teachings of your faith and explore alternative paths?
Yeah, I think that part of it is, like, I was raised Catholic. And whenever I got to college, I got very confused about Catholicism, because I was in a liberal institution, liberal arts, where they are really teaching post-Christian beliefs and stirring that up, and I was impressionable. And so I got confused, and I ended up becoming agnostic for a while, where I'm like, well, I believe in God, but I was confused about the Bible. And so along the way, when the New Age started to become more obvious to me and just present, and I was exposed to it, for me, I think the initial point was I had that stirring of like, well, I know that I've been taught, like, Catholic upbringing tells me that these things are wrong, but you're curious, right? Cheryl, you talked about curiosity, right? And so you have that curiosity, number one. Number two, then you go, well, how can I justify this? And for me, because I'm a journalist, I was like, well, I just want to learn. I want to research this. So I had lied to myself, saying that it was like investigation, because I was writing a book, right? And that was the first thing. But I think the second thing for me was that I twisted up the Bible. And even though the Bible's very clear about divination, I think I'm very passionate about teaching this particular thread. I think that the issue is that there's a huge confusion for Christians and non-Christians alike about, like, well, what is divination? Because I think most people will say, oh, it's trying to see the future. Well, that's not actually true. It's seeking occult knowledge in any capacity. And that I didn't know back then. And I wish that I had had someone to tell me that back then, because it might have made me take a little bit more pause and go, well, okay, because I can't really kid myself with the tarot cards now.
Yes.
Because initially I was like, oh, well, I'm not really trying to see the future. I'm just using it as like a coaching tool and trying to understand my present more. Mm-hmm. And that's how I think a lot of even Christians are approaching things like tarot cards and other New Age and occult ideologies and modalities.
Did anything happen, Teresa, that really started some red flags that maybe you had a sense, we kind of say we have a sixth sense or a gut feeling that I might be dabbling on some dangerous ground?
Yeah, I didn't. So at first, there were some things that were definitely happening, but I had totally tucked them under the rug. I didn't see them as red flags then, but I see them as red flags now. And in the beginning, when I first started to work with tarot cards, I remember it was like the third or the fourth day that I was using the tarot cards. I woke up on my bed and the tarot cards were around me, and I don't remember going to sleep, and I didn't remember being tired. And so this marked the beginning of me starting to lose time. And I've worked with exorcists. I've worked in deliverance ministries with people coming out of these belief systems who were previously demonically oppressed or possessed. And looking back at my own story, it becomes clear that I was actually experiencing at that point the early stages of demonic possession. Wow. I actually did experience possession through these practices, through engaging with these practices and inviting the demonic. And the initial stages with the tarot cards was definitely the losing time. And then the second part was receiving information or knowing the unknowable, knowing things that there's no way that I should have known. And so at that point, I had really opened those doors to the occult. I was receiving information from demons. I didn't know that they were demons.
Yeah.
I was deceived. And I was not only reading for myself, but for other people. And so even the tarot cards as an idol just for me, the tarot card reader becomes an idol for other people. So it's like a double stack of idolatry that breaks the first commandment.
We're talking with Teresa Yanaros about her book coming out in January, Freedom from Darkness. And Teresa, in my intro, I mentioned that you have observed that many people turn to what they call being spiritual but not religious. We've read a lot about those who consider themselves to be nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no formal religion. But yet you still use the word, even into the occult, people are seeking something. They're looking for something. Why is this happening this way, where they're drawing away from a formalized religious upbringing to something else, but they're still looking for something?
Yeah, everybody has that inside of them. God gave us that desire to know him. And so deep down, people that get involved in these practices, usually they're legitimately seeking God, and they're getting wrapped up in the delusion because that's where Satan wants us. And so I have a very strong heart for people in those belief systems. I never want to talk down to them. I want to try to reach them, right, and help them keep seeking, but find it in the right place, you know. And I find that with working with people from all over the world, there tend to be the same cultural traps that are drawing people into stepping away from traditional religion that then move them into being more susceptible to go into the occult. And I find that the common cultural traps that I am observing would be Gnosticism, Eastern practices, the human potential movement, even forms of unconventional health. The law of attraction is a really big one, deconstructionism, destructive feminism, and conspiracy worldviews. And then that will draw people into getting involved in the occult.
And I know you mentioned that when you went to college is when you started to question. And, of course, most parents know, unfortunately, when you send your kids away to college these days, and many times that's where they tend to lose their faith. But we're also seeing this draw, and I guess kind of a targeting even younger children, tweens and those kids be in high school. Is there something parents should look out for, either from their college students who come home, or coming home for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or just in their own children living in their own home? Parents should look for red flags that maybe their kids are dabbling in some of this stuff?
Well, if I can just jump in there, for not to interrupt everyone, but I'm just going to tag onto that, James. I was looking for a coloring book. I was bringing some little gifts to, I teach CCD, and I like to buy them little things, near the holidays. And there it is. The coloring books. Now, these children are not old enough to drive and go buy themselves something. Parents, don't buy them the coloring book that says spells. I mean, right there among Pokemon and Barbie and all these cute
It
little
wasn't a
coloring
spelling
books.
book.
No, it was not spelling. It was like how to cast spells and witchery and dabbling in all those things, like the dabbling in the occult. And it was among the children's coloring books. Don't buy that for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a great example that I'm going to springboard off of that to answer the question. Because when I talk about red flags, and I talk to anyone, whether it's a group of parents or whoever, and they're really trying to make sure that they're protecting the youth, I teach them two words: invocation and evocation. So when we're talking about witchcraft or we're talking about the occult, invocation means to call in, evocation means to call forth. So if you're assessing any kind of game or material or book, look out for them teaching, invoking something or evoking something, because that right there at a base level, that's witchcraft. So when you're really just on guard for what these books and these TV shows and movies are teaching the youth, right there, that's when you should really take pause and teach them to be able to see, okay, that I'm not going to call something into me. I'm not going to call something forth. And then on the flip side of that, teaching catechesis, so like actually grounding into catechesis, showing them the better way, leading them into the sacraments, teaching about the sacraments, and those threads are going to help them, like even if they get older and they don't want to listen to the parents and they're going to go off and do whatever they want, if there has been that foundation laying of the sacraments and understanding of those things, it's going to be present for if they end up going into any of those belief systems, they're going to have that already present in themselves, where if something will happen to destabilize that track of going into the occult, they're going to already have that to fall back on.
In the book, Teresa, again, we're talking with Teresa Yanaros about her book coming out in January, Freedom from Darkness, but I'm reading the notes here that in your book, you mentioned that people coming out of the occult sometimes experience severe spiritual attacks. Can you share a specific story of someone who faced this?
Yes, absolutely. So in my experience working with people coming out of the occult and also having gone through it myself, I've laid it out in a roadmap that describes the 10 steps. It's 5 steps in and 5 steps out. And so when I start working with a person, it's important for them to know so that they can understand where they're at. And when they are coming out of the occult and they've chosen to follow Jesus and they're learning about Christianity and all of those things, and they're leaning into that journey, they enter what I call the woods. Now, the woods are dark. The woods are scary. This is where you really have to persevere, because at this point, this is when the enemy's really going to be trying to isolate you and confuse you and draw you back into bondage. So during this time, attacks really increase. Some things that I've seen, some things that I've personally witnessed or experienced, demonic vexation, which would be like bruises on the body. When I was getting freed of the occult, I was having nightmares of demons dragging me to hell. I would wake up with bruises on my back. And at that point, I knew I had gotten in way over my head. And, I went on that long and arduous journey of deliverance, because it's not a one and done. It is a very long and arduous journey that you have to persevere through with Jesus. And I've seen other people also experience vexation like that as they're getting freed. Another thing that is very common is intrusive, obsessive thoughts. So the demons can put on a person to basically make them obsessive over some thread. People that I work with coming out of witchcraft, what usually happens is they become obsessed over what I call lying synchronicities, or seeing patterns everywhere around them, and it feels like they can't break out of it mentally. And so I give them tools in order to help them learn how to lead thoughts and purposes captive to the obedience of Christ. And there's theological grounding and, immersing yourself in Scripture and sacraments. And I just encourage the person to persevere. And what you tend to find is, like, over time, they have a deeper surrender to Christ. And that's when you start to see them come out of the woods.
What would you recommend to someone who feels like, I might be involved in something like this? I might be being drawn in. It sounds like it's so there are so many layers and it's complex. It's not something maybe we can do on our own. What's the first person? Do they go to a priest, a deacon? Do they sit in adoration? Or like, what's the first thing they should do?
It's a great question. So, and you're spot on with this. Don't isolate, and you hit on that. And it's so important. And the frustrating thing about all of these threads to me is that, unfortunately, a lot of the churches are not equipped to be able to help people out of these belief systems because they just simply don't understand it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why I wrote the book that I wrote, because I am very passionate about equipping everyone that I can, especially the body of Christ, especially Catholics, right, where we can be able to be present for people coming out of these belief systems. There's always a red letter attached to it. People get really freaked out when, you've had some association with the demonic, right? Because it's the extraordinary form of Satan. So yes, it's scary to people, and they don't really know how to minister to people coming out of the occult. And I think it's so uncomfortable that people just assume, oh, okay, well, you believe in Jesus now, everything's fine, move on with your life. And it's not that simple, because it always comes down to one word: worldview. And to detangle or dismantle an occult worldview, it takes a lot of time. It takes people who know what they're doing. It doesn't simply just happen. So finding a very good spiritual director is going to be really important. Finding someone that actually knows what's going on. Again, this is why I have my ministry, Spirit Sanctified, which is a website that has a bunch of free resources for people to be able to just consume. And that's why I do that. And I don't want people to isolate. It's really important. And so it's just really getting them into a local church where they feel like they have someone that they can talk to that understands and sees them properly.
And sometimes the churches will have a prayer ministry, prayer teams that pray over you after a Mass. Sometimes that's affiliated with the charismatic movement, deliverance. That those, if you could tap into them, they might be able to then direct you to someone that they know. But don't, like you said, don't stay home. Don't think about it. Reach out and start exploring, what are my resources? Where can I go?
Well, and something that I want to say on this is that some of the deliverance ministries can actually be more or less beneficial, I would say, to someone coming out of the occult than beneficial. It depends. And the thing is, when you're working with a person coming out of the occult and they're still in that occult worldview, they have been trained and programmed through the occult to look for those quick fix, easy answers to their problems. And they can, if they're still in that worldview, they can look to a deliverance ministry as though it's going to be that quick fix, easy answer. And they're essentially applying the same occult worldview towards something like a deliverance ministry. And this takes time for a person to come out of those beliefs through spiritual formation and yielding to the sacrament in order to get that actual true metanoia and transformation. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
The book is called Freedom from Darkness. We've been talking with the author, Teresa Yanaros, and it's published by Sophia Institute Press. Their web address is sophiainstitute.com. The book comes out January 22nd. Teresa, let our listeners know, because I did mention again in the intro that you have in your ministry online resources and YouTube. How can they find out more about you and what you offer?
Yeah, so if you go to sophiainstitute.com/freedom, you can actually get the pre-sale for the book. And if you use Freedom20 as the code, you get 20% off on the pre-sale. And then for the free resources, you can go to spiritsanctified.com.
Very good.
Beautiful.
Well, Teresa, thank you so much for being with us today. The book, we can't wait to see it and read it. There's a lot there. So thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Cheryl. Really appreciate you guys.
God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.